It was a normal Friday afternoon in a quiet Portland suburb, sun shining, birds chirping, and the smell of freshly cut grass in the air. For the Hart family, life was simple, predictable, and full of love. 4-year-old Amanda was the heart of it, Ola, whirlwind of blonde pigtails, curiosity, and laughter. Her parents, Rodney and Sabrina, lived for moments like these, when the world felt safe and small. But on that May day in 2015, everything changed in what felt like the blink of an eye. Amanda was outside, drawing with chalk in the driveway, just steps from the front door. Sabrina was inside, briefly distracted on a work call. Rodney came home, parked the car, and saw the colorful drawings on the pavement. But Amanda was gone. What followed was every parent's worst nightmare. A frantic search, neighbors pouring out of their homes, police lights flashing, and a community holding its breath. The chalk drawings were the only sign she had ever been there at all. Amanda wasn't just missing, she had been taken. A white van was spotted slowly rolling down the street, but with no license plate and no witnesses, it vanished like a ghost. The investigation was massive, but after weeks of searching, the trail went cold. The headlines faded, the media moved on, and Amanda became a face on missing posters. A story whispered about in the neighborhood. But 2 years later, a simple maintenance job in a forgotten part of Mount Hood National Forest would change everything. A worker named Dave McCann was called to unclog a toilet in an abandoned restroom deep in the woods. What he pulled from that drain was beyond disturbing clothing, carefully bundled and stuffed down the pipe. Small clothes, a pink sweatshirt, blue shorts, and tiny underwear. It was clear this wasn't just trash. Someone had tried to hide something. Detective Miles Corbin had never stopped thinking about Amanda. Her case had haunted him for years, and when he saw that pink sweatshirt, he knew. This was hers. The same one in the last photo Sabrina had taken of her daughter. The same one Amanda was wearing the day she disappeared. The case was reopened, and the search for answers began again. Who had left those clothes in that toilet? Why now? After 2 years, and most importantly, what happened to Amanda? The forest had kept its secrets for a long time. But now, someone had forced it to speak, and what it revealed would shake everyone to their core. The discovery of Amanda's clothes in that remote restroom changed everything. But it didn't bring the relief anyone hoped for. Instead, it opened a door that had been sealed shut for 2 years, and behind it lay a darkness none of them were ready to face. For Detective Corbin, it was like waking up from a long, restless dream, only to realize the nightmare had only paused. He had spent years chasing shadows, sifting through false leads and dead ends, all while carrying the weight of Amanda's case on his shoulders. Now, with those soaked, faded pieces of fabric staring back at him from the evidence photos, he felt both vindicated and horrified. The girl who had haunted his thoughts for 2 years was real again, her presence undeniable. But where had she been all this time? And more importantly, who had kept her hidden so well? Back in their home on Sycamore Lane, Rodney and Sabrina sat, frozen in silence as Corbin explained what had been found. Their living room, once filled with laughter and the sound of Amanda's small footsteps, now felt like a museum exhibit of a life interrupted. Every object around them seemed to carry a memory: the couch where Amanda used to curl up and watch cartoons, the bookshelf lined with picture books she would never finish reading, the framed drawing she had done just days before she vanished. That drawing still hung on the wall, its colors fading slightly in the sunlight. It showed a smiling sun, a rainbow, and 3 stick figures holding hands. A family. Sabrina couldn't stop staring at the photo of the pink sweatshirt on Corbin's tablet. She could almost feel the soft cotton between her fingers. Remember how Amanda loved wearing it even when it got too warm outside? She had sewn that tiny tear on the cuff herself, using white thread because it was the only color she had. Seeing that same thread in the forensic photo made her stomach twist. There was no denying it anymore. This wasn't some cruel coincidence, or another hoax meant to torment them. Amanda had been taken, and someone had tried to erase every trace of her, but they had failed. As Corbin continued speaking, Rodney remained silent, his jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. He wanted to ask questions, demand answers, but his voice felt trapped somewhere deep inside him. He kept replaying the moment he pulled into the driveway, the chalk drawings scattered across the pavement like forgotten treasure. He remembered thinking, she must be inside with Mom. That one fleeting thought, gone in an instant, had become the single most painful memory of his life. If only he had looked harder. If only he had checked the backyard first. If only he hadn't assumed. But there was no undoing the past. Only the unbearable present and the terrifying possibility that Amanda had suffered more than they could ever imagine. Corbin left soon after, promising to keep them updated as the investigation moved forward. As the front door closed behind him, Sabrina finally broke down. Her body shook with quiet sobs, her hands clutching the throw blanket Amanda used to wrap around herself during movie nights. Rodney sat beside her, his arm around her shoulder, but neither of them spoke. What was there to say? They had lived for 2 years in a limbo of not knowing, clinging to fragile hope that Amanda might still be out there somewhere. But now, with the confirmation that her clothes had been hidden away in the wilderness for months, maybe even longer, they were forced to confront the unthinkable. Amanda was gone, not missing, gone. Still, the question loomed over them like a storm cloud: who had done this? The media picked up the story within hours. Overnight, Amanda Hart's name was back on every news channel, every online forum, every social media post. People who had long since moved on from the original disappearance were suddenly talking about it again, speculating wildly about who could have taken her and why it had taken 2 years for any real clue to surface. Some called it a miracle that the clothes had been found at all. Others weren't so kind. Conspiracy theories began circulating almost immediately. Some claimed the police had bungled the original investigation. Others accused Rodney and Sabrina of hiding something, anything, to fuel their own grief. The internet, as always, turned tragedy into spectacle. For the Harts, the renewed attention was suffocating. Reporters camped outside their house again, their cameras flashing like fireflies in the night. Neighbors who had once offered support now avoided eye contact, unsure of what to say or do. The town that had once rallied around them now felt like a place of judgment and suspicion. Rodney and Sabrina withdrew further into themselves, rarely leaving the house except to meet with Corbin or attend briefings with the FBI liaison assigned to their case. Meanwhile, Corbin and his team worked around the clock, combing through old witness statements, re-interviewing neighbors, and pulling together every shred of evidence they had collected over the years. The discovery of the clothes had given them a geographic focus they never had before. Mount Hood National Forest was vast, but now they had a specific location to investigate. The restroom where Dave McCann had found the bundle became a crime scene overnight. Forensic teams swept the area, searching for any trace of DNA, footprints, or discarded items that might link someone to the disposal of Amanda's clothing. But nature had already begun reclaiming the space. Rain had washed away much of what might have been useful, leaving investigators with little more than assumptions and desperation. One thing became clear as they pieced together the new information: whoever had taken Amanda had returned to the forest recently within the last year. That suggested a level of ongoing fear, a need to erase evidence even after believing they had gotten away with it. Corbin knew that kind of behavior pointed to someone who wasn't a professional criminal, but rather an opportunist, a person who acted on impulse and panic rather than careful planning. That profile matched the early theories they had considered in 2015, but now it had a chilling new layer. Whoever did this wasn't just a random stranger passing through. They had ties to the area, they knew the forest, and they had been close all along. But who? That question consumed Corbin as he pored over old neighborhood interviews, revisiting every odd neighbor, every suspicious sighting, every minor red flag that had surfaced during the initial search. There were dozens of names, hundreds of tips, but nothing concrete. Most people had alibis, or at least explanations that checked out. But one name kept resurfacing: Frank Miller. Quiet, strange, lived just 3 blocks away. No history of violence, but a record of trespassing. Nervous during the original interview, no solid alibi. At the time, he had seemed like just another loose end. Now, with the forest connection and the recent disposal of Amanda's clothes, Frank Miller was looking less like a background figure and more like a man with something to hide. Corbin ordered a deeper dive into Miller's background. Where had he gone after Amanda disappeared? Had he traveled? Did he own property? Did he have a reason to return to Mount Hood? The answers would take time, but for the first time in 2 years, the investigation had direction. And with each new piece of information, the truth edged closer to the surface, no matter how buried it had once been. The arrest of Frank Miller didn't bring the relief anyone had hoped for. Instead, it opened a new chapter in a story that had already taken too many dark turns. For Detective Corbin, the satisfaction of finally closing Amanda Hart's case was overshadowed by the weight of everything they hadn't been able to prevent. The truth was out now, brutal, undeniable, but knowing what happened didn't undo the past 2 years of suffering. It didn't bring Amanda back. It didn't erase the fear that had gripped her parents, the endless sleepless nights, or the way their lives had unraveled while the world moved on without them. For Rodney and Sabrina, the arrest meant something else entirely. It wasn't just about justice, it was about proof. Proof that they hadn't imagined their daughter's life, that she hadn't simply vanished into thin air like some cruel illusion. But with that proof came a fresh wave of grief. Heavier than anything before, they had spent so long holding on to the possibility that Amanda might still be alive, clinging to the fragile hope that one day she would walk through their front door. Now, that hope was gone, replaced by the unbearable certainty of her death. And yet, even with Frank Miller in custody, the questions kept coming. How had he done it? Why Amanda? What had those 2 days in the cabin been like for her? The details of his confession were enough to make anyone sick, but the gaps in his story gnawed at them. He claimed he hadn't meant to kill her, that it had been an accident. But the idea that someone could accidentally suffocate a 4-year-old girl while trying to silence her was a lie. No one believed, not even him. And still, he repeated it. over and over, as if saying it enough times might somehow lessen the horror of what he'd done. Detective Corbin knew better than to expect closure from a confession alone. He had seen it before the way families thought they would feel different once they had answers, only to find that the pain remained unchanged. Truth didn't heal wounds like that. It only made them bleed again in a different way. Back in Portland, the media descended once more. Amanda's name was trending again, her face filling screens and headlines. But this time, there was no search, no rallying cry of hope. This time, it was about the monster who had taken her, the grotesque details of how he tried to hide the evidence, and the chilling simplicity of his crime. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, waiting for statements, interviews, reactions. Social media lit up with outrage, hashtags forming around Amanda's name, calls for stricter laws, and demands for justice that had already been served. But none of it reached the hearts. They had disappeared again, retreating into the quiet space where only grief could follow. Their house on Sycamore Lane had been sold weeks after the trial, the last remnants of their old life boxed up and driven away. They had left behind the chalk drawings on the driveway, the framed photo of Amanda with cat whiskers on her face, the bedroom that had remained untouched for 2 years. They couldn't live in that house anymore. Every corner held a memory. Every sound echoed with what used to be. Instead, they moved to a small town on the Oregon coast. Far from the noise, far from the cameras and the speculation. There, they tried to rebuild something resembling a life, though neither of them spoke much about what that meant anymore. Some nights, Sabrina would sit by the window, watching the waves crash against the rocks, imagining the sound might eventually drown out the thoughts in her head. Other nights, she would stare at her phone, scrolling through old photos of Amanda, reading the comments from strangers who said they would never forget her. Rodney tried to keep busy. He found work managing a small hardware store, something simple, something that didn't require too much thinking. He liked the routine, the way people came in and asked for nails or light bulbs or paint, how they talked about weekend plans and home repairs like the world hadn't changed forever. He smiled when he needed to, nodded along, played the part of a man who had moved on, but inside, he felt hollow, like he was going through the motions of a life that no longer belonged to him. Meanwhile, the investigation into Frank Miller continued, even after his conviction. Corbin and his team weren't done with him yet. There were still pieces missing, things he hadn't told them, things he might not even remember. They went back to the cabin in Mount Hood, hoping to find more evidence, something that might give them a clearer picture of what had happened during those 2 days. Forensic teams combed through the crawl space again, checking for any trace of biological material, any overlooked detail that might provide a final answer. They found nothing. The cabin remained a place of quiet horror, its walls soaked in silence, the air still thick with the echoes of what had taken place inside. Even stripped bare and searched twice, it felt haunted, like the forest itself remembered what had happened. There, back in Portland, online forums reignited with discussion. Amateur sleuths dissected every detail of the case, debating whether Miller had acted alone, whether there had been any signs beforehand that someone might have stopped him. Some pointed to the white van Mr. Henderson had seen, wondering if there was more to that sighting than had ever been explored. Others speculated about the timeline, questioning whether Miller could have gotten Amanda to the cabin so quickly without being noticed. Corbin read through the theories, knowing most of them were nonsense, but also knowing that sometimes, somewhere in the noise, a single overlooked detail might surface. He had learned to listen to the internet, even if most of it was speculation and paranoia. He had seen cases cracked open by something as simple as a commenter noticing a background detail in a photo that no one else had caught. But in this case, there were no new revelations, only the same grim facts laid out again and again. Frank Miller had taken Amanda. He had hidden her in the cabin. He had panicked when she tried to escape. And then he had buried her in the woods, trying to erase every trace of what he had done. Except he hadn't succeeded. Amanda's clothes had survived, soaked in water, trapped in a toilet in a forgotten restroom miles from where she had lived. Her tiny pink sweatshirt had refused to disappear, refusing to let the world forget her. And because of that, justice had come slow, painful, but real. Still, Corbin couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, more beneath the surface that they hadn't uncovered yet. Something about the way Miller had spoken during the interrogation, the way he had hesitated before describing certain moments, like he was choosing his words carefully, like he was hiding something. He made a note to revisit the case file, to go through every statement again, every interview, every piece of forensic evidence. If there was something they had missed, he needed to find it. Not for the press, not for the public, but for the hearts. Because even now, even with the trial behind them, they deserved to know everything. And until then, the mystery of Amanda Hart wouldn't truly be over. The arrest of Frank Miller should have brought some kind of relief, but for Rodney and Sabrina Hart, it only deepened the ache that had lived inside them for 2 years. The man who took their daughter was finally in custody, his confession sealing his guilt like a tombstone over everything they had lost. But knowing the truth didn't bring Amanda back. It didn't erase the image of her small pink sweatshirt, soaked and twisted in a toilet miles from home. It didn't undo the 2 days she spent terrified and alone in that cabin. Or the final moments when Miller's panic turned into something far worse. Detective Corbin had seen this before, the way families thought they would feel different once justice was served, only to find the pain still sitting heavy on their chests. He knew that arrests didn't heal wounds, they just gave them names. Still, he pressed forward with the investigation, determined to uncover every last detail, not for headlines or courtroom drama, but for the hearts. For them, every answer mattered. The search warrant for Miller's old Portland apartment came through quickly. His sudden move to Eastern Oregon after Amanda disappeared had already raised red flags. But what investigators found inside his former residence sent chills down Corbin's spine. It wasn't just the isolation of the place, tucked away in a dim corner of a quiet neighborhood. It was the things he kept, things no one had noticed before because there had been no reason to look too closely. Inside, a locked closet, wrapped in plastic and buried beneath stacks of old newspapers, detectives uncovered a shoebox filled with photographs. Not just any photos. Dozens of them images of children playing at parks, riding bikes down suburban streets, laughing with parents at backyard barbecues. Some were clearly taken from public places, snapshots stolen through a lens without consent. Others were more disturbing close-ups of little girls' faces, frozen mid-loft, unaware they were being watched. And then there was Amanda. One photo stood out among the rest, a grainy, slightly blurred picture of her standing on the driveway, chalk in hand, wearing that same pink sweatshirt. The timestamp placed it just weeks before she vanished. Corbin felt his stomach twist as he stared at the image. Someone had been watching her long before that day. Watching, waiting. The discovery reignited the case in ways no one expected. The media, which had briefly moved on after the arrest, swarmed back with renewed intensity. Online forums exploded with speculation. Had Miller acted alone? How many other victims had he targeted? Was Amanda a random opportunity, or had she been chosen? For the Harts, the new revelations were unbearable. Sabrina couldn't stop crying. Rodney barely spoke. They had clung to the idea that their daughter had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, that her abduction was an act of impulse rather than premeditation. But now, faced with evidence that Miller had been observing her, photographing her, possibly even fantasizing about her, that fragile illusion shattered. Corbin knew they weren't done yet. There were still questions unanswered, pieces missing from the puzzle. And so, he went back to the beginning, retracing every step of the original investigation with fresh eyes, every neighbor interview, every surveillance video, every anonymous tip that had come in during those first frantic weeks after Amanda vanished. It all needed to be re-examined. What he found disturbed him more than he expected. Miller's criminal record had always seemed minor trespassing charges, a few citations for loitering near schools. But digging deeper, Corbin discovered something troubling. In the early 2000s, Miller had been questioned in connection with the disappearance of a 6-year-old girl named Emily Rios from a park in Salem. She had gone missing during a family picnic, vanishing without a trace while her parents sat just 50 feet away. No body was ever found. No suspect was ever charged. But Miller had been seen nearby that day alone, lingering near the playground. Sketching something in a notebook. The police had dismissed him at the time. No physical evidence linked him to the crime. But now, with Amanda's case reopened, and Miller's confession fresh in the files, Corbin couldn't ignore the similarities. Both girls were young, blonde, and vulnerable. Both had been taken in broad daylight, and both cases had gone cold. Leaving behind grieving families and unanswered questions, he contacted the Rios family, careful not to raise false hope but unable to keep the information to himself. Emily's mother, now in her 50s, broke down. The moment she heard Miller's name, "I remember him," she whispered through tears. He was always around. Always watching. Corbin left the meeting shaken. This wasn't just a single crime. This was a pattern. And if Miller had taken more than one child, there could be others, more families living in the same limbo the Harts had endured for 2 years. But how many? That question haunted him as he pored over Miller's phone records, bank statements, and travel history. What he found suggested movement trips to different towns across Oregon, sometimes alone, sometimes under assumed names, hotels booked in cash, rental cars returned with wiped odometers. It was all circumstantial, but it painted a picture of a man hiding something far bigger than a single crime. Then came the most chilling discovery of all. Buried in an old storage locker rented under a fake name, investigators found a box of personal items, small backpacks, stuffed animals, school supplies. None of them belonged to Amanda. Each had a tag attached, handwritten notes describing the child they might belong to. Names like Lily, Zoe, and Maddie. Dates scribbled beside them, ranging from 2010 to 2016. It was enough to send shockwaves through the department. Enough to reopen multiple missing persons cases across the state. enough to confirm what Corbin had begun to fear. Amanda hadn't been the first, and if they hadn't caught Miller when they did, she wouldn't have been the last. The press got hold of the story within hours. Headlines screamed about a potential serial predator. Social media lit up with theories, accusations, and desperate calls for answers. Families of missing children reached out, begging for someone to listen, to believe them. But for Rodney and Sabrina, the revelation was a fresh wound. Another layer of grief piled onto an already unbearable loss. If Miller had taken others he had been hunting for years, then Amanda's abduction wasn't just a tragedy. It was part of something far darker, something that had been happening in plain sight. They had hoped the trial would bring closure. Now, they realized, it was only the beginning, because the real question remained unanswered. Where were the others? The authorities launched a massive search effort, combing through every location connected to Miller's movements. Forests were scoured, abandoned buildings searched, remote cabins investigated, cadaver dogs were deployed, drones flew overhead, and volunteers flooded in from across the state. Every lead was followed, every possibility explored, and yet, nothing, no bodies, no signs of struggle, no confirmation that the other names in Miller's possession meant anything beyond sick fantasy. But Corbin knew better than to believe in coincidences. He had seen enough cases to know that predators like Miller didn't just vanish without a trace. They left behind clues, patterns, and somewhere, hidden in the silence, the truth was waiting to be found. So he kept digging, even as the trial date approached, even as the courtroom became the center of national attention. Corbin continued his search. He visited Miller's childhood home, interviewed old neighbors, tracked down former teachers, anything that might explain how a man like him could become what he was. And in a dusty attic above an old garage, he found something unexpected. A journal, handwritten, pages filled with dark thoughts, violent fantasies, and references to the forest house where no one would ever find him. One entry, dated just weeks before Amanda disappeared, chilled him to the core. I saw her today. She looked right at me. I think she knows. The words were written in shaky script, as if Miller himself had been afraid of what he was about to do. Corbin closed the journal slowly, his hands trembling. This wasn't just a confession, it was a warning. Because if Miller had told someone else, if Amanda had somehow recognized him before he took her, then there was still something out there, waiting to be uncovered. And until it was, the truth would never be complete. The arrest of Frank Miller should have been the end of the story. The confession, the recovered remains, the courtroom verdict, each piece locked into place. Like the final clicks of a puzzle that had haunted an entire community for 2 years. For Rodney and Sabrina Hart, there was no relief in it, only the grim certainty that their daughter would never come home. But at least the truth had surfaced, buried beneath layers of lies, panic, and time. Detective Corbin thought he could finally close Amanda's file with something resembling peace. He had spent years chasing shadows, but now the monster was behind bars, and justice had been served. Or so everyone believed. But then came the letter. It arrived at the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office just weeks after Miller's sentencing, slipped inside a manila envelope with no return address. At first it was treated as just another piece of prison correspondence, an inmate trying to gain favor or attention. But when Corbin read the opening lines, his blood ran cold. I didn't do it. That was all it took to stop him mid-sip. From his coffee-stained mug, he read on, slowly, carefully, his eyes scanning every word with growing unease. The letter wasn't defensive posturing or the ramblings of a man desperate to delay his fate. It was detailed, specific, and worst of all, it made sense. Miller claimed he had confessed because he was afraid that when confronted with the evidence, pink sweatshirt, the cabin, the hair clip, he panicked. He said he had seen the clothes before, knew about the cabin, and recognized the implications of the hair clip because he had worked construction jobs near the Hart house years ago. He admitted to being strange, withdrawn, even creepy, but not a killer. He wrote about how the pressure broke him, how the detectives had worn him down until he gave them what they wanted, how he started believing the story himself, just to make it stop. And then came the part that truly unsettled Corbin. There was someone else, Miller wrote. I saw her once, a woman, in the forest. She was watching me. Corbin sat back in his chair, staring at the page like it might change if he stared long enough. He had heard everything under the sun, in his career confessions, retractions, wild conspiracy theories, but this felt different. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was precise. Miller described specific moments during his time in the cabin. Sounds he had heard outside, shadows moving between the trees. He mentioned, the night he buried Amanda, how he swore he saw headlights in the distance, flickering through the fog, though no one ever reported seeing him. The letter ended with a plea, find her, before she hurts someone else. Corbin couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He went back over the case files, reread the original interviews, looked again at the forensic reports. There were inconsistencies, small ones, but real, like how the soil composition around Amanda's grave didn't quite match the area where Miller said he buried her, or how some of the items found in the cabin seemed to clean, almost staged. And then there was the timeline how Miller had supposedly held Amanda for 2 days but showed no signs of having cleaned up afterward. Yet the cabin remained largely untouched. He reached out to Dave McCann, the maintenance worker who had found the clothes. When asked if he remembered anything unusual about the restroom that day, anything that might seem insignificant, McCann hesitated before recalling something odd. There was a backpack, he said, empty, leaning against the wall outside. I didn't think much of it at the time, thought maybe a hiker left it by accident. But now that you're asking, I don't remember seeing anyone else around. A backpack, no name, no identification. Just sitting there, waiting. Corbin ordered a full re-examination of the restroom site. Forensic teams combed through the area again. Despite pushback from higher-ups who saw it as a waste of resources, they found nothing overtly damning, no DNA, no fingerprints, but they did recover something unexpected. A small, partially burned receipt tucked beneath a loose floorboard. It was dated just weeks before Amanda disappeared and listed a rental agreement for a storage locker in Portland. The locker belonged to someone named Lillian Voss. No one had heard of her before. No connection to Amanda. No criminal record. But digging deeper revealed a pattern: disappearances. Not high-profile ones, not the kind that made national headlines, but children. Young girls, all taken within a 5-year window across the Pacific Northwest. Each case unsolved. Each victim blonde, small, vulnerable. And each abduction eerily similar to Amanda's. Corbin's stomach twisted as he pulled up the old police reports. There were no suspects in any of the cases. No common threads. Until now, Lillian Voss had lived in Portland, had moved away shortly after Amanda vanished. Her last known address was unoccupied, the landlord claiming she had vanished without a trace. Neighbors barely remembered her, a ghost, just like the headlights Miller had seen in the forest. Rodney and Sabrina were stunned when Corbin showed up at their new home on the coast. They had been trying to rebuild, to find some semblance of peace. But the look on Corbin's face told them everything they needed to know. This wasn't over. She's still out there, Corbin said, placing the file on the table between them. We don't know who she is. We don't know why she did this. But we believe she may be responsible for more than just Amanda. Sabrina stared at the photos spread out before her, faces of little girls she had never met, but whose pain mirrored her own. Rodney clenched his fists, his jaw tight with fury and fear. What do we do? He asked quietly. We find her, Corbin said, before she finds someone else. The investigation reignited with a new urgency. Task forces were assembled. Missing persons databases cross-referenced. Social media lit up with renewed interest. Online sleuths dissected every detail, searching for patterns, connections, anything that might lead to a breakthrough. But Lillian Voss had covered her tracks well. No digital footprint, no bank records, no phone calls. Just whispers in the dark. Then, a tip came in from a woman in Seattle who claimed she had rented a cabin near Mount Hood the summer before Amanda disappeared. She remembered seeing a woman walking alone in the woods, always dressed in dark clothes, always watching. The woman had struck up a brief conversation once, mentioning how much she loved the quiet of the forest. She said she liked places where people disappear. The witness recalled, like it was a joke. Corbin's team traced the rental payment to a prepaid credit card registered under a false name, but the transaction had been linked to a gas station security camera footage showing a woman in her early 30s, wearing sunglasses and a hoodie, paying cash. The image was grainy, but clear enough. She had brown hair, but it was dyed. Underneath, strands of blonde peeked through, the same color as Amanda's. As the search intensified, a chilling realization settled over everyone involved. Frank Miller hadn't acted alone, and the person who had helped him, worse, manipulated him, was still free, still hunting. And somewhere deep in the forest, the silence was broken again. The courtroom was silent as the jury foreman read the verdict. Guilty, all counts. Kidnapping, aggravated murder, evidence tampering. Every charge stacked against Frank Miller found him responsible. The room exhaled in a collective breath that no one realized they had been holding. Rodney and Sabrina sat motionless in the front row, their faces unreadable, their grief too deep for tears. They had waited 2 years for this moment, but nothing about it felt like justice. It felt like confirmation. Confirmation that their daughter had suffered, that she had died alone, and that the man who took her had never truly understood what he had done. Detective Corbin watched from the back of the courtroom, arms crossed, jaw tight. He had seen this before: the way trials ended, not with triumph, but with exhaustion. The truth had come out, but it hadn't brought Amanda home. Nothing ever would. As the bailiff led Miller away, the man glanced over his shoulder just once. His eyes met Corbin's, and for a brief second, something passed between them. Not regret, not fear, something else, something colder. Corbin couldn't shake it. Later that night, after the cameras had gone home and the headlines were already shifting toward the next tragedy, Corbin sat alone in his office, staring at the case file on his desk. The final report. The confession. The photos of Amanda's gravesite, carefully marked on a map so her parents could visit if they ever wanted to. Everything was wrapped up, neat, clean, closed, but something didn't fit. He flipped through the pages again. Slower this time, the confession, the timeline, the location where Amanda's body had been found. It all lined up, too perfectly. His phone buzzed on the desk. A message from one of his tech analysts. Just got the full forensic results back from the cabin. Found something strange. Corbin frowned. Strange? How? The reply came instantly. There was DNA, but not just Miller's. There was another profile. Female, partial match to Amanda. His stomach dropped. He drove straight to the lab, ignoring the late hour and the protest of his tired body. When he arrived, the analyst was still there, waiting with a folder in hand. We ran the sample through CODIS, she said, handing him the report. No exact match, but we did find a partial familial link. Corbin scanned the document. His pulse quickened. This can't be right, he muttered. It is, she said. This woman shares genetic markers with Amanda. She's related, possibly a half-sibling. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Amanda had a sister. He rushed back to the Hart house, waking Rodney and Sabrina in the early hours of the morning. They answered the door, bleary-eyed, confused. What is it? Sabrina asked, clutching her robe around her. Corbin hesitated before speaking. There's something you need to know. Inside, he laid out the findings. The DNA. The partial matched the possibility that Amanda wasn't an isolated victim, that whoever took her may have taken someone else, or worse, may have left someone else behind. Rodney shook his head. That doesn't make sense. We only had one child. Corbin looked at them both. Unless someone else had her. Sabrina's face went white. What are you saying? I'm saying that Frank Miller may not have acted alone, and I think he knew more than he ever told us. They didn't sleep that night. By morning, Corbin had secured an emergency warrant to re-interview Miller. He was transferred to a secure interrogation facility under the guise of needing additional details for the court record. But Corbin had other plans. When Miller saw him walk into the small, sterile room, he didn't look surprised. You figured it out, Miller muttered, almost relieved. Corbin sat across from him, folding his arms. Who was she? Miller stared at the table. His fingers twitched nervously. She was real, Corbin pressed. Wasn't she? Another girl. Someone connected to Amanda. Miller swallowed hard. I didn't know until after. Not really. Corbin leaned forward. Tell me everything. For the first time, Miller looked afraid not of punishment, but of something deeper. Regret, fear, maybe even guilt. There was someone else, he whispered. She called herself Lillian. Said she worked with missing children. Said she wanted to help me. Corbin's blood ran cold. Help you do what? Miller looked up slowly. Take them. Silence filled the room. She showed up after I took Amanda, Miller continued. Said I had potential. Said I wasn't alone. That there were others like me. People who understood. Corbin's mind raced. This wasn't just a predator. This was a recruiter, a manipulator, a ghost hiding in plain sight. She made me take Amanda's clothes, Miller said. Said we needed to cover our tracks. Said if I listened, she'd protect me. And did she? Corbin asked. Miller let out a bitter laugh. She set me up. Corbin leaned back. You're saying she used you to commit the crime? Then framed you for it? Miller nodded. She disappeared the same day I buried Amanda. Left me with the body. With the guilt, with the fear. Corbin stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Where is she now? Miller shook his head. I don't know, but I heard her voice once. On the phone. Right before my trial. What did she say? Miller's voice cracked. She said Amanda was just the beginning. The room chilled. Back at his desk. Corbin pulled up every missing persons case from the Pacific Northwest over the past 10 years. He filtered by age, gender, hair color, dozens of names, dozens of families, dozens of unanswered questions. And then he found it. A pattern. Girls, blonde, young, taken within a 5-year window. Each abduction eerily similar to Amanda's. No suspects, no leads, just silence. Until now. Corbin flagged the cases, sending alerts to federal agencies, launching a new task force. The name Lillian Voss became a priority. Every database, every tip line, every cold case forum lit up with speculation. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows, she was watching. Because the next morning, Corbin received an envelope at his home. No return address. Inside a single photo. It was Amanda. But not the smiling face paint version. This was different. In the image, she was standing in the forest, looking directly at the camera, terrified, confused. And beside her, barely visible, in the blur of movement, was a woman, tall, thin, wearing a dark hoodie. Her face was obscured, but her hand rested gently on Amanda's shoulder, like a mother guiding her child. The note inside was short. She was mine first. Corbin's hands trembled as he read it. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. And somewhere far away, Lillian Voss smiled, knowing she had been seen, knowing she was still free, and knowing the game had only just begun. The courtroom was silent. After the verdict, no cheers, no outbursts, just a heavy, exhausted stillness that settled over everyone like dust. Frank Miller sat motionless as the bailiff led him away, his eyes empty, his face pale. He didn't look at the Harts as he passed. He didn't need to. They had seen everything they needed to in those few moments of his confession, the fear, the guilt, the twisted justification that had kept him alive with his secret for 2 years. Rodney and Sabrina stood slowly, their bodies stiff from days of sitting through testimony, reliving every second of Amanda's short life and her tragic death. They held hands, not out of comfort, but because it was the only thing tethering them to each other anymore. The trial had given them answers, but it hadn't brought back their daughter. It had only confirmed what they had feared most, that she had suffered, that she had been afraid, that someone had taken her light and buried it deep in the forest. Outside the courthouse, the world waited. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and protesters held signs, some calling for stricter laws, others demanding justice for other missing children whose cases remained unsolved. But none of it reached Rodney and Sabrina. They walked past it all, heads down, hearts heavier than they had ever been. Detective Corbin met them at the curb, his expression unreadable. "It's over," he said quietly. Sabrina looked up at him, tears streaming silently down her face. "No," she whispered. "It just stopped." Corbin nodded, understanding more than he let on. He had spent years chasing this case, living inside its pain, knowing that even if they found the truth, it wouldn't heal the wound. Justice wasn't the same as closure. It was just the end of the search. The weeks that followed were quiet. The headlines faded. The news moved on. Life returned to something resembling normalcy for everyone else. But for the Harts, time felt different now. It stretched out before them like an endless hallway, lined with doors they would never open. They sold the house on Sycamore Lane without looking back. The memories were too sharp there, too close to the surface. Instead, they moved to a small coastal town, where the wind carried salt instead of sorrow, and the sound of waves replaced the silence Amanda had left behind. There were no reporters there, no cameras, just the quiet rhythm of everyday life. They tried to build something new, though neither of them knew exactly what that meant. Some days, they barely spoke. Other days, they talked until the early hours of the morning, remembering things they hadn't thought about in years, the way Amanda used to hum when she colored, how she always insisted on wearing mismatched socks, how she loved to dance in front of the mirror, like she was performing for an audience only she could see. They planted a garden in their new backyard. Flowers that Amanda had loved: daisies, sunflowers, lavender. Sometimes, they would sit outside and watch the bees move between the petals, pretending, for a moment, that they were okay. But nothing could erase what had happened. And then, one day, Sabrina received a letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a single page, handwritten in neat, careful script. Asterisk, I watched you for a long time. I saw your pain. I know what it feels like to lose someone you love. But you're wrong about who did this. You got the wrong person. Asterisk, Frank Miller wasn't strong enough to take her. He wasn't smart enough to hide her. He only confessed because he couldn't handle the pressure, because he wanted it to stop. He still don't know who really took Amanda, and I do. Asterisk, the letter ended there. No signature, no explanation. Sabrina read it 3 times before showing it to Rodney. His face went cold as he scanned the words. This is another hoax, he said, handing it back. Someone trying to get attention. But Sabrina wasn't so sure. There was something about the tone, the confidence of the message, that unsettled her. She showed it to Detective Corbin, who frowned deeply as he read. This isn't the first one we've gotten, he admitted. Since the trial, we've received dozens of letters from people claiming to have information. Most are clearly fake, but some feel different. He hesitated before continuing. We've reviewed the case files again, every piece of evidence, every statement, everything lines up. Miller acted alone. There's no proof of anyone else being involved. But, Sabrina asked. There's always a but, Corbin admitted. Sometimes, the mind doesn't want to believe the simple answer. We look for patterns, for hidden meanings, even when there aren't any. Still, the letter stayed with them. It haunted their dreams, crept into their conversations. Was it possible? Had they convicted the wrong man? Months passed. The letter became just another part of their grief. Another unanswered question they learned to live with. Until, one night, Sabrina opened her laptop and checked the Facebook page she still managed for Amanda's case. She scrolled through old posts, reading comments from strangers who still remembered, people who still cared. And then, near the bottom of the feed, she saw something unusual, a comment from an account she didn't recognize. It was just one sentence. I know who really did it. Attached was a photo, a woman, in the background, trees, a cabin, and in her arms a child. The child looked just like Amanda. Sabrina's breath caught. She zoomed in on the image, heart pounding. The cabin. It was familiar. It was the same cabin where Frank Miller had taken her. But the woman, she was a stranger, and she was smiling. Sabrina screamed for Rodney. When Corbin saw the post, He traced the account immediately. It had been created minutes before the comment was posted. No history, no other activity, just one message, one image, and then silence. They reopened the file, re-interviewed witnesses, looked again at every photo, every forensic report. Nothing changed, but the doubt remained. Had they gotten the right person? Or had someone else been watching all along? Years later, the bench still sits in the park overlooking the ocean. The brass plaque still reads asterisk in loving memory of Amanda Hart. May her light remind us to cherish every moment. Asterisk children still play on the swings. Parents still watch from benches, laughing, talking, holding on to their babies a little tighter. Life goes on, but somewhere, deep in the forest, the silence remains, and someone remembers what really happened, because the truth doesn't always come out. Sometimes, it waits for someone to find